something I've been obsessed with in the background of life for almost 2 years now is returning to reality. The process of waking up from a dream, but not just any dream, not a nightly occurrence, rather a dream we live where mundanity and daily stress fall away, washed over with a truly intense moment. The vacation which puts usual sights to shame, the first kiss of a budding sort of romance, the collection of strangers so instantly turned into friends. It's what would normally be a dream finally made real. Spending hours, days, weeks, maybe even months or years planning for these moments, trying to become the people they happen to, it's impossible not to be elated when they finally arrive, like a heightened state of being sometimes claimed as the very point of life itself. Some may even live for that alone. And some may even live off of that alone like me, often exploring and explaining such extremes to make sense of it all underneath. Yet despite that near-endless value we give these moments, they are not endless in time to match. The usual sights return, the first kiss turns out to be the last, and the friends recede back into strangers, and then even further into the hazy outlines of memory, the same fate as every great moment before them too. It's this tragedy which is much less often discussed, a large majority of stories ending just after the moment of elation and before the impending mundanity sets in. We never see the heroes put down their swords and begin to farm, a stinging not just in their hands as they till soil in peace, but in their minds. How did a blow which once toppled tyrants now simply move a few inches of dirt? How do we go back? How do we witness life's greatest and settle for its average? How do we return from importance to obscurity, from sunshine to rain, from vacation to work, from enlightenment to brain fog and stupidity and dishes and traffic and laundry and alarms and everything we tried so hard to escape, only to succeed for less than 1% of the time we'll be alive? The question dives into the depths of obsession. Today, with some stories you probably love and some experiences I certainly did, I hope we can find some peace about all of that. Now, crucial to understanding how to move on from the best moments of our lives is why we wouldn't want to in the first place, and how not doing so will probably only make things worse. And there's no better place to look for that than Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Now, we're going to be skipping right ahead into some spoilers and working a bit backwards, so be warned, and that applies for pretty much every series today. This is the life of the main character, David Martinez. As an edgerunner, a punk living on this world's fringes through, let's just say, legally dubious work, there is a lot of danger. His friends are kidnapped, he's almost shot time and time again, and they end countless lives. But there's also a lot of joy in what it affords him, the people he gets to handle it with, especially rising above the poverty which plagues Night City. The after parties with chugged drinks and loud music and dancing, honest conversations with his mentor Maine, training with every other member of the crew as they teach him new skills, brain dances and hilarious jokes, a montage of life which feels extremely full and vibrant, even if it comes with some risk. In contrast to the rest of this world, which is so lifeless despite the futuristic surroundings, it's even more remarkable, something David would want to stay in for as long as possible. And logically, so long as he works hard enough, keeps himself stronger than the nameless chaff he guns down, then this can continue, right? That's how he thinks, at least, turning from a once fully fleshed teen who got beaten up into the ground by cyberware into a decent chrome jockey himself, replacing lung, spine, and more with it. It's giving up a part of himself, a very visible one, the very physical form of a human itself, but not the invisible ones, not the mind or the soul. And so it's in service of maintaining the things which feed those more important parts instead anyway. It's a fair trade, right? The physical components of humanity for the social and mental ones. But there is a problem with this. To some extent, yes, David's hard work is what creates the best moments of his life. He got into this crew because he proved himself on a terribly stressful job, and he stays in it because he keeps doing so time and time again. This joy he knows does not exist without his effort. And yet, it isn't a result of it, but just a consequence of how it interacts with a much more important world. For example, say David never has his run-in with Lucy, who brings him into the fold. Then would all of this cyberware actually get him anything? Say Maine is having a bad day when they first meet, and isn't so kind as to let David keep the implant that was supposed to be his. Instead of working on those jobs, he'd be a puddle resulting from them. He needed the right conditions surrounding him before his actions could mean anything. We see this proved in the most brutal fashion, not with how things start though, but with how they end. No matter how much David wants this crew and their times together to last, some of them will die. Pilar's killed to a no-name nothing pissing in the street, a cyber psycho who killed him for no more reason than they breathed. Now, he was maybe a bit more antagonistic than he needs to be, but it was just that they walked through this place at the wrong time. And not long after, Maine dies as well, turning Cyber Psycho himself on a mission gone wrong where Gloria dies protecting him from the onslaught of Max Tack, the death squad no punk escapes from. Maybe the job had some warning signs, but they were just doing business as usual. It's not like they took a risk beyond their usual means, and even if they didn't, they have to work, right? Just as conditions began their effort's importance, it ended it too. What this is getting at is that this happy little world they've created is taken away not from their mistakes alone, but because it wasn't made up from their successes alone to begin with. It was simply a time where their will and the world lined up, and nothing more. When we combine this with David's sacrifice of his humanity for it, we see something given up eternally for something gained temporarily. The trade isn't equal. I don't think this is really outside of common knowledge in Night City. In fact, it was something David himself once easily accepted. Before he was an edgerunner, he was almost a normal teenager in the poor neighborhood of Santo Domingo to his single mother, Gloria. I say an almost normal teenager because despite all of his disadvantages, he actually attends the best school in Night City, Arasaka Academy, a direct pipeline to the strongest megacorporation. Of course, best school is relative. It's really just like a pay-to-win scenario to keep the rich families rich and the poor ones poor. But David is here against all of that due to his mother's tireless efforts, working extra long hours as an EMT responding to the city's most brutal crimes, so much so that she often just gets home and passes out on the couch before getting up to work once again. And that's not the only cost of this, as it drains their funds so much that they can't even afford to properly wash their clothes, for example, because of course a washing machine has a subscription fee in this world. And even then, these classes, which are full of his future co-workers, treat him like shit. Even with his perfect grades, the principal tries to force him into a different school, and his classmates only ever think of him as street trash. The rich will never accept him, so what's all this effort and struggle really for? As far as David can see, all Gloria is doing is wasting the time on dreams that could never be reached, when they could be using it to make a life of getting by together more habitable. Of course, David dreams of a lot more. I mean, look at his restless leg, the way he travels across this city, and the brain dances he does when he's home alone. It's not like he's entirely happy wishing for a below-average life where there is still struggle. But why waste what little they could have in the hopes of what could never be? He admits this to his mother, that he would rather drop out and get a job to help them slowly improve the life they have with love instead of reaching so far above into hate. The validity of David's perspective is once again proved in brutal fashion. Caught between gang violence, wrong place at the wrong time, Gloria is killed for no reason at all, and even worse, left to die in the street for not having enough to pay for the premium service, and even worse, allowed to die in medical care for the same exact reason, and even worse, given to her grieving son from a budget cremation vending machine, and even worse, leaving him unable to afford even the meager life they had. All that work really was for nothing because this world, a cruel, terrible one which values human life less than shit, can take it all away in a single instant. All they could ever do was what he wished. Make do with what they happened to stumble into. So David already knew this, that he had no control over his best moments. And yet, this is what happens to him when Pilar, Dorio, and Maine die, leaving the crew on the brink. The once flesh and blood teenager who dabbled in cyberware becomes a hunk of metal, replacing every last ounce of physical humanity except his head. And when the threat grows even larger, he'll toss away even the image of a human form to reside in a machine made for nothing but death and destruction. And he does it all in the name of keeping this crew, the source of his best time, alive. We can say this because David simply becomes Maine, the glue of those times. What was going to happen to the crew without Maine, the one who held them all together and dealt with all the business? The man who gave everyone an equal share in the mutual respect to make it such a close-knit team. The mentor who truly helped David enter this much more interesting world. Well, David can't keep everyone who passed alive. He can simulate what their lives were all about. He can carry forward their dreams, and in Maine's case, copy his role and form. He can keep him alive by becoming the same bulk of chrome, not just taking the image but literally using the same arms, outdated tech which doesn't fit his sockets and often malfunctions. He can take the role as well, becoming the mentor for the next group of teenagers seeking excitement, an idol to the world of aspiring punks, as Maine once was for him. It's really quite simple. To keep the best times alive, he keeps the parts of it alive. He controls the world by taking the one thing he can control, himself, and making it into what the world needs. And it does succeed to a degree. While they have some losses, Rebecca, Falco, and Kiwi are still there, and Lucy is still back with them at home, if not working with the crew. It's not exactly as it was, but the idea is still there, the same spots for parties and the same kinds of jobs. So he gets to keep those best moments, but is it really worth all this? I mean, does it truly make sense to give up so much and work so hard for a dream that feels further and further away? He saw his mother do exactly that and learned it didn't work, and it destroys him just the same. But it does make sense. It only didn't to him at that time because of his inexperience. He was a child who hadn't seen the world, his greatest forms of excitement being those pre-packaged brain dances of completely outrageous experiences. Excitement, speciality, those were basically fictional concepts from the storybooks. But now that he's experienced it not through someone else's eyes and body, but through his own, it's great, it's tangible, it's come about in part through his actions. It's something he can directly compare his old crappy life to right now. He can feel what it's like to party with the punks just as vividly as what it's like to watch his mother die. He could accept a worse life before because he didn't have that former experience, didn't know that there was anything better. He can't do the same thing now. The ignorance has been spoiled. It's all perspective. What do you have to compare this moment to? And more, what is the time that it took for those things to occur? He lived some 17 years or so without knowing a great moment, and only a few months of actually knowing them. That means it's much more likely for them to never occur. And so once you have that pocket of great times, does it make sense to give it up and wait? Or to hold on for dear life? Even if it requires so much work and effort and the cost of even the self who loves it, that's really just condensing the effort which would happen across the next 17 years of waiting anyway. It isn't actually that different, and at least it offers a guarantee rather than an unknown. And with that in mind, holding on just makes sense. We witnessed so much brutality in Night City to create this mindset, a little bit of joy hidden within a much larger area of despair. This part of David's mindset is an insight into why we cling so desperately to these best moments, Night City acting as a sad exaggeration and condensing of our own world's logic. The issue is that this was all in a vacuum. It was the internal logic of holding on, not the consequences of doing so and how the world itself responds. How the act itself kills the reason for it. David becoming Maine is a philosophical problem, of course, revoking his humanity more and more in the very search of it, and calling into question what it means to be human at all. And that plays into our topic here today because, well, who is David? Is he the child at the start, or this collection of metal only about a year later? Does he actually still exist to enjoy this world that he tried so hard to keep alive? I don't think he really does. He's carrying forward so much of other people, Maine's form and role, his mother's dream of him being special, the memories of Pilar and Dorio, the sadness of new kids lost on jobs, all of that so much that he can never enjoy this life, even though he still technically has the conditions of the best moments of his life. When he thinks an action through, it isn't just what would David do, the unconscious calculations we all make. It's all of that, and then you have to add on a layer of what would Maine do and what would Gloria want. Each thought is extreme mental toll. The stress of taking on the hopes and dreams of so many he loved to keep them alive fries his brain, because of course it will. This is a world where you can hardly live for one person, let alone 4 or 5. He spends a lot of his time simply staring off into space, lost in a TV tuned to whatever just to have some noise playing and drown out the thoughts of other people in his own head. He's created the time, but he can't actually enjoy it. And since he's not the same person, some of those conditions which relied on him will start to fail too. We can look at his relationship with Lucy to see this. David working so hard to keep this time and the dreams of others alive means being the leader of a crew taking on more and more jobs and making more and more money to fund their lifestyles and bring new people in and distract from the awful world, plus the power and ability it affords them to achieve other dreams, like Lucy's of seeing the moon. So, him living for this world and others means doing all of this that he is. Yet this is exactly what drives him and Lucy apart, as his known status and clear affinity for cyberware makes him a target of the megacorporations who seek to use him as a test subject. So she has to constantly hack away his information from their databases and prevent others from gaining it with them, which pulls her away from her time with the crew. And this only gets worse and worse the more intense jobs David takes on, like the one he receives from Faraday that puts him closer to the corporations than ever before, a job which ends with Lucy being kidnapped from trying to protect him from the most danger yet. The actions he's taking to keep those old moments alive become the very reason why they start to die here and now. It's not even that he got to live a condensed version of the life he could have had, trading 50 years later for a handful now. It's that the decision to try and do so defeated the very purpose to begin with. The very moment David decided he could trade himself for this life, both sides died. This is the brutal first lesson. It's not just that hanging on to our best moments is hard or unhealthy, it's that it's impossible. An interesting aspect of managing our relation to these best moments or ideal worlds is actually how much we can even accept them in the first place. Echo from Arcane is a great example of this. He's living in a very unideal world. An eventual pupil of city councilor and great mind of 1,000 years Heimerdinger, he must clearly have some of the same qualities that make the former pupil Jace a celebrated and great man. However, as a Zonite from the disadvantaged lower city rather than Piltover, the rich upper one, he lacks the stage for them to be actually expressed to such an extent. He can't spend all day working out the fine details of every invention like Jace, because he has many more responsibilities and threats to his way of life. As he learned from his father figure Benzo's sudden death, the things that make your life good can be taken away at any moment if you're not ready to fight for them, to be more powerful than the thing taking them away. That's the summary of why he is not the celebrated inventor. He's always too busy fighting off the possibility of loss which can strike at any time, always avoiding the worst outcome. We see this reflected in the Firelight Society he builds around one of, if not the only, tree in the Undercity. Explaining it to newcomers, he says,
"Everyone here was an addict or a victim. They needed somewhere safe to start again."
What he's created here is a floor, a not so low for people to hit instead of rock bottom. Hidden away in the Undercity, with each newcomer blindfolded until entry to maintain secrecy, they're not a society expanding out to try and make everything better. They do good work, but only here, always preventing. If you need extra convincing, this also explains how he thinks about Jinx. Growing up together when she was still Powder, he had a lot of fond feelings for her, maybe more than anyone else in their little group. And as an adult, even as Jinx, he's seen her be confused by a girl who looks like her sister Vi and freak out, clearly not entirely lost from her past. He loves the person stuck deep in there and sees hints of her time and time again. Yet despite all this, he always says that Powder is gone and Jinx is here to stay. And when he has the chance to kill her and end the chaos, in total control of their fight, he hesitates, allowing her to drop a grenade, injure him, and escape. He couldn't do it looking down and seeing not some monster, but the girl he used to love, helpless and terrified. It's clear that he doesn't actually believe she's all the way gone, but that he has to try and believe it, as always, to prevent the worst. Trying to save her might lead to adding even more faces to that mural of the lost, so is saving one life really worth losing two more? The safest option is to believe that she's gone and done with. And then, in Season 2, after uniting with Heimerdinger and speaking with Jace about the Arcane, The man who always tried to prevent the worst from happening is transported to a world where the best did instead. In this time, Hextech was never invented, the cities united and prospered, so much so that even Vander, a man who did anything for peace, and Silco, a man who in Echo's time turned the Undercity into a drug-fueled nightmare and killed Vander, put aside the fact they once tried to kill each other and unite. Benzo is alive and well, and Echo is an inventor with a comfortable life surrounded by all his childhood friends. The only change for the worse is that on the day of the original heist, Vi died, likely the tragedy that brought the cities together. This is where Echo adds an interesting layer to the discussion. Before ever having to accept the return to a less ideal world, he has to try and accept the better one. He handles it with apprehension, actively pissing off the people around him, like this interaction with Powder.
It was a mistake to come here.
What's that supposed to mean? Go, before I do something I regret.
Believe me, I'm working on it.
And when he's reunited with Heimerdinger, who's lived in this different world for over 1,000 years, he doesn't ask anything about it or all that time, instead simply asking if he knows how to get back. He doesn't even consider that since he overwrote a him who existed here, maybe a him still exists in his world anyway, carrying out all his duties there. He's entirely focused on his responsibilities in a different world before ever considering just staying in one which already has those solved and is perfect. It's almost like he doesn't want to recognize this world. I think that's true because of his continual focus on preventing the worst. Not just because it's how he focuses on things, but because doing that for so long just makes such an ideal world harder to accept. To see all these same people and places in such a better state is to prove that such a thing was always possible, that a world with almost the same exact conditions as his at one point became so great. Which means maybe his was, and maybe even is, able to do the same. It isn't entirely lost, a state where the best one can do is prevent the worst, but it's still entirely capable of becoming like this dream he finds himself in. To slow down and recognize that is to see that there was so much more he could have done than just make a floor. With all that time and energy trying to maintain, maybe he could have been a part of how this world became that one instead. Maybe the collective efforts of that whole society he's crafted could do even more. They could actually expand, giving even more and more under their umbrella, and then keep the cycle of benefit going. It's not like Echo made the world any worse. He was always helping. But it's like learning that you walked a mile only to make it 100 feet away. That's a hard pill to swallow, and so to start, he simply doesn't. Plus, we've seen how he feels can often contradict how he thinks, like with Jinx. Despite his very mature front, deep down he's still someone who hesitated to make the kill for greater good because of past bonds, who can cry when he finds out his old friend is still alive, even if she's helping an enforcer, Piltover's more often than not hateful and violent goons to Zonites. With that emotionality he's always trying to push down in mind, he probably has some fear about getting attached to this world, finding so much enjoyment in its ideal nature that his responsibility is eventually outweighed. If he couldn't trust himself to be unselfish with Jinx, how could he do so with Powder? How could he go back to a world without Benzo and Vander, the few men who ever helped him in life? The second he recognizes this world, there's a risk of mental torture either way. If you return too early, then you might always wonder what could have been. But if you wait too long, then maybe you start to feel guilt from the selfishness, end up returning because of that, and then resent giving up what you love to come back here. Either way, you're longing forever. The only way to try and prevent this is to get away as fast as possible. But his responsibility has something else to say about this. What would the point of it all be if he just simply rushes home to reach the same point as before? Wouldn't that just be his same mistake as always, preventing but never gaining? Even if he struggles to recognize it actively, deep down he can see this mistake and recognizes this decision to return or not as the same thing. And if he's already forced to act on it, he may as well start learning the lesson, right? Learning from this world and how it came to be so great, studying its history and its advancements, understand its people, and come back with knowledge to counteract that longing. Anything to make this effort more than just maintenance, to prove he can make the better that he's seen. And for the sake of everything he loves, Echo manages to. I mean, let's just think about it practically, right? Even if he's focused on getting back as quickly as possible and nothing else, is working alone the best way to do that? Not only is that just one set of hands and one pair of eyes, but he doesn't know this world and all its resources either. Working with others who can bring a new perspective, new ideas and knowledge of this world is the most efficient way to return. How many solutions home would he miss without those other eyes and hands? The ideal world is necessary in order to address the unideal one. That's kind of the point. We can never truly understand a worse world without imagining what a better one could be, when it could be, and why it could be. We need to understand these possibilities and their intricacies, because if not, how will we make them happen when the conditions are right? The chance will come along and we'll just watch it pass without ever even knowing. How many has he already missed in his own world? The first step to a better one is embracing the possibility of a better one. This is what he acknowledges when he tells Powder,
I used to dream the Undercity could be like this, but somewhere I got consumed by all the ways it wasn't. I gave up on it, gave up on you.
So, the way he apologizes to Powder is by painting a mural of I, directly embracing this concept. To do this, he had to spend time in this ideal world away from his goal. He had to stay away from the work and walk down the street to buy paint, witnessing all the people and their lives along the way. He had to think about how he wanted it to look, and then take the second of every single brushstroke. It's moments of just existing there with a moderate task, mind wandering into everything this world has to offer. This is the first time he's ever gotten to really feel what Jace's life was like, the celebrated inventor. And now he can comprehend those motivations and spaces, understand them and bring them back. How ideal can ideal be? But an important part of this is also that it's helping to correct the one thing this world had better, or the one world his had better, Vi. If she has to be gone in this world, then everyone should at least get to see how amazing she turned out to be even through such hardship, someone strong and simply cool. It's recognizing that even in a utopia like this, there's something he can do to make it better, that his efforts, his perspective can always matter. This does two things. First, his time back home wasn't wasted. The perspective he gained during that time is exactly the one which allowed this addition. But more importantly, if he can make even an ideal world better, imagine what he can do with one that has so much room to improve, and with the exact knowledge of how it can. With so many more options and so much to recount, he might actually be able to change that world. So he does apologize to Powder, spends time with her, and even falls in love with her, going on to say,
You ever wish you could just stay in one moment?
The exact feeling that this whole thing has been about. But he does it in the context of working his way home the entire time. Because even if he's found something to lose here, he has so much more to gain back home to counteract that. But even more than just sterile logic, if he's found something to love here, well then he's found something to love back home too. Because this world is mostly the same. The same names and faces, the same places that they're in, changed only by a few core events. If he loves something here, then he loves 90% of the same thing back home, all of the overlap that they share. I mean, this Powder has experienced many of the same things as that Jinx. So he hasn't simply found another world to love, he's actually found all the reasons to love his own. The good things deep down that just need to be brought out. This solves the fear of growing attached. If you're afraid of losing what you love here, then you leave for exactly that reason so you can make it happen back home. You take those same parts and pull them to the surface, craft the ideal with your own two hands. You make it much more special and important than something you just stumbled into. You make it something you made. And so when he returns, the first thing he goes to do is save Jinx. Maybe her best qualities aren't being expressed right now, and maybe she's gained some worse ones along the way, but deep down inside is the same person he just shared that dance with. If he can make some of the same things from that world true in this one, then maybe he can make that Powder here too. Now, the important acknowledgement is that this doesn't come easily. Jinx is one of the people most different from what he just saw. He has to keep rewinding time to keep her alive, trying different words and approaches. He's coming at this in 4 seconds at a time again and again. But it was possible. As long as he kept trying, he'd find the right combination. Like the advice he finally passes on to convince her,
No matter what happened in the past, it's never too late to build something new.
to some extent, it's all just conditions. We have to remember that they're often horribly unfair ones. But what matters in terms of our own control isn't what they are and how they came to be, but what we use them for, what we build with the old. With all this in mind, it's no mistake that Echo is the one to land the crucial blow in this final battle, because he was probably the most motivated of anyone except Jace. He hasn't just imagined a better world, he's loved it. And that's exactly why he can save this one. We saw from David that we can't simply cling to an ideal world, but Echo adds the necessary context that we can't simply ignore it to prevent that either. The only option is to be flung into the cycle of life's ups and downs, the cycle of endless longing and probably regret. But our two examples so far have been fairly powerful people, and sometimes maintaining and returning aren't about changing the world into one you can accept, a place full of laughs and smiles, but it's just about accepting one you can't change and holding out hope it might smile upon you one day instead. This is where we find the beautifully abstract Sonny Boy. Our main character is Nagara, a boy who simply wants to run away from everything and exist undisturbed by all. He never fails, but only because he never acts. We see this in his first interaction with Nozomi, a carefree transfer student ripping up her notebook on the school roof. She offers for him to join in, but he refuses both her and that conversation, saying he has somewhere to be just as quickly as he arrived. But anyone could tell from him wandering onto the roof during summer vacation, that's a lie. He's aimless, nowhere to be, which she calls him out for.
I know a lot of people just like you, acting like they have so many places they need to be. Do you really have somewhere you absolutely have to be?
Unresponsive to her claims except with anxiety, he keeps trying to flee through the now locked door, probably expending more effort trying to get away than simply talking would have taken. Clearly, this course of action isn't affording our aimless boy anything better in life. We see this again with their responses to an injured seagull which flew into the window. Neither actually knows how to treat its wounds, and yet they still have very different responses. Nagara simply watches it struggle in pain, while Nozomi takes it inside and offers comfort and respect, if nothing else. She would much rather try even though there's no obvious solution, because how did anyone ever find out without first trying? Possibility is always first a choice. She scolds Nagara for the opposite, and he jumps to the other end of the spectrum, saying,
Fine then. I let it die because I'm heartless. Totally selfish. That what you wanted to hear?
And this reveals the extent of his stasis. He's fine with being the worst, unsalvageable, worthless, if it means he doesn't have to do anything. And maybe that's even better. To be so far gone that there is no point. Sometimes everything can be an excuse so that you don't have to try. Unknown to Nagara for some time, he causes the events of the series when he tries to escape from Nozomi on the roof. It turns out his principal is God, and God grants special powers to students at this school. It is simply just that big of a coincidence. But what Nagara gains is the power to create new worlds, which causes the going adrift that we witness, where the school is trapped in an endless void. A place without time, where every item replenishes when used, and nothing can truly change. The perfect place for Nagara. A stasis perfected as he lies on the floor with, for the first time ever, truly no excuse not to. Of course, as it's a story, things do move forward from here nonetheless, and these students uncover many different worlds, from mazes full of digital mice to endless crevices where you can fall for eternity. It's an absolutely insane collection of spaces with no regards to time or really to place either, but one thing they all share is a lack of change in their immortality. Nagara's most prominent quality infecting every other world and person. Well, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of these students from across time originally seek to get home. The number dwindles down with each class, everyone finding their own stasis. Some become forests in peace with the animals, some invent death by changing themselves into an unrecognizable state, some fight over a single hair for thousands of years, but none seek true escape from stasis. Every story which enters this world fades away into nothingness. What was once chaos is now mundane. And yet, despite starting this and making a world so perfect for it, Nagara is the one person who loses that quality instead of gaining it. This is because of Nozomi, his source of a truly new world. When she confronted him on the roof, he paused. He never said it, but he recognized in the most minor way that she was right, and she saw it too. Maybe like Rock, it's her hobby, maybe it's boredom or ego, but whatever the case, she sets about making this change happen, forcing herself into his world. At first, he couldn't see how, and maybe we never did either in that first episode. But things do start to change. His normal used to be lying on the floor, but later on, it's lying on the floor with her. He and Nozomi start to actually talk and share meals, this once annoying girl now just a normal part of his life as they float here. It might not have been desirable or comfortable for her to bother him like this, but it happens so much that he just adapts to it anyway, just like everyone else eventually adapts to the stasis instead. That's the thing. With the human ability to adapt, we are constantly changing. And when, like that, the change doesn't declare itself, Nagara can be fine with it. That's telling. It means that the change itself isn't the issue, it's the idea of it, the knowledge of its occurrence, his own fears, and nothing more. Getting used to Nozomi is the important proof, but adaptation is missing something. It's missing our active involvement in it, our decision to do it. It's missing choice. And so sometimes it needs to be more obvious. At the end of that episode, the school is shrinking into the void and thrown into chaos. Nozomi, seeing this state, and also a light which she believes is the way home, decides why sit around and face a certain void when, well, she could at least try and find that light. So she runs across the roof to build up speed and leaps for it. Not even coming close, she's bound for an eternal fall into endless darkness. And for the first time ever, this means Nagara can't maintain a stasis. Sure, he can do nothing, but then he loses a part of his normal in Nozomi. And if he does act, well, he may lose another part in the school and the other classmates. There is no option which guarantees to maintain, no comfortable normal to rest into. There is only uncomfortability and change. So he has to finally act and at least try and save her in it, right? If he wants to keep doing nothing, then he has to finally do something. It may be motivated by a desire to stay the same, but it includes the chance of things not to, and by his own will for the first time. And that means something important. As he rushes after her, grabbing the fence with one hand and her with the other, he hasn't just accepted stasis now. He's chosen it. It is the slightest theoretical difference, but the most important one. His first real decision. He has a stake in things now. And so without knowing it, he can do this again. As the fence breaks and they fall, he's prepared to act, creating a new world with an ocean for them to fall into, saving them and the school. And we can see his growth in the first two worlds he's created. The first one, he could only make one with nothing. But now, he creates a whole island, an unknown space to expand into and explore, to learn how to live with, not to simply exist within. This island is the potential for what Nagara could be, a reflection of how important his simple decision was. And this very much becomes the point of Nozomi's interactions with him. It's not that he's the worst or useless, but that he's never once recognized his own worth and ability, never really had a situation before her which made him do so. I mean, he can create a whole new world, so imagine what he could do without all this inhibition. If he can keep facing uncomfortable situations and being forced to act and succeed because of it, he could really be special. He could make best moments. So this is what she does. She lets him fall towards rocks so he has reason to act and create a whole new world to understand. She pulls him into the water to see the fishes which he comes to love. She forces him past inhibition to see all the worthwhile things that can be gained. For him to finally see that so much amazement was only ever one decision away. Even if he can't dictate, he can make the choice of possibility, not to simply accept, but to choose. And as more people begin to know and interact with his ability, placing their hopes and dreams of him into it, making things so much more uncomfortable and consequential, he comes to understand and master this power. The world around him is not passive, it is, and has always been, in some small part at least, his decision, how to interact with it if nothing else. At the very least he should try, because maybe it will lead to something. And when you choose, when you force that certainty and finality, even if nothing comes of it, you can move on rather than wondering what if. You can be more prepared for the next similar situation, just as Nagara gets more and more confident, controlling his powers to a greater extent with each use. As a means to reach the next best moments, this is endlessly important. It means we can't just choose the great ones. We have to choose all of them in order to reach the great ones. We see this exemplified in the Tower of Babel. Here, some students have carried these large bricks for thousands of years, building the tower downwards into heaven and, well, chasing treasure along the way, of course. It's nonsense. But no one here ever questions it because, as they say,
I don't think there are any castaways that really believe we're going to get to heaven someday. Even if it is all just BS, I'm happier chasing after that tiny glimmer of hope.
But as someone who's lived in stasis before, this is seen for the excuse that it is. It's saying you have somewhere to be when you don't, creating something to believe in rather than embracing the nothing which forces you to truly look, to find a real and important one of your own will, to choose. Sometimes having a reason is what lets us do nothing at all. We can expand on which reasons allow that as well. The infinite ones, like being busy all the time, or building a tower for thousands of years, something abstract that can't really be tested. Because that's the thing. Infinity, eternity, is not logical, at least not to mortal beings. We often think that with infinite time we would find ourselves doing infinite things, reaching the peak of our possibility. But this tower is the real result of that, an endless excuse to never do anything instead. What motivates us to try is that we're limited, that we can only say, I'll do it tomorrow, so many times before, well, we're done. The threat of the end is always there, always pressuring us to be something because it's now or never. We have to decide on everything because we experience so little in the grand scheme of things that waiting for an ideal moment just means dying. We choose our defining times in beautiful fear. Without that limitation, what reason is there to do anything? You can wait 1,000,000 years to ever start finding a worthwhile moment, an equivalent of 12,000 lifetimes wasted, but that's not even 1% of the time you have. There's always more time to wait to take the easier path of doing nothing. The threat of an end is required for a beginning to ever take place. The only thing to do is combating this is to be uncomfortable, to induce penalty and limitation and rejection, to provide those forces which demand different and better before we can choose comfort. And so, this is what Nagara does, walking upwards instead of downwards, incurring enough penalties that he's called into the office overseeing this tower. And once there, he breaks free of its backwards nature and returns himself right side up, escaping from its grasp. That's the discomfort. To recognize that the world can be upside down and be the one to appear as such to everyone else exactly because you saw it and did something about it. To have a spotlight on him and have less options, to be uncomfortable so he has to reach somewhere else, somewhere he chooses to be comfortable instead. Because stasis isn't having no options, it's having too many. And choosing one thing is rejecting 1,000,000 others. So he escapes and rejoins Nozomi and Mizuho, a total of 3 left trying to get home. But that number soon drops to 2. While death doesn't exist in this world, life can change forms into something that simulates death, people becoming guns, forests, or rocks. So as Azakaze, one of their classmates with almost godlike powers, is tasked with and succeeds in creating death, Nozomi falls victim to it as well. She turns into a compass that points to the light she saw and nothing else, her will alone surviving in this object. And this leaves only Nagara and Mizuho trying to return home, enlisting the help of Rajjani to physically find a way across this world's abstract planes into the light. From that, they hope to be able to return. Now, at this point, returning almost seems like nonsense. In this world, Nagara is one of the most special people, and not only that, he learned the exact lesson needed to thrive in this world. Mizuho is much the same, able to order anything she wishes with her power, although it's actually her cat's. Her power is making things immortal, which is the other half of what created this world's stasis. But if these two can stay here, they can literally create anything they wish, one making the world and the other populating it with everything, even living things, even objects that exist only to a single person. They could keep on creating a string of their best moments ever, rather than settling for a limited world, right? Well, that's not certain. After all, we see that everyone else started in that boat and went the opposite direction, so what's to say the person Nagara is in 1,000 years won't cycle back to stasis, these few months of lessons overruled by years of the opposite? If a man who hates humans so much, tortures and experiments on them, can kill his own identity by becoming endlessly kind, who's to say what infinity will do to Nagara? It simply isn't logical to humans. And to stay would be half-assing the lessons they learned, allowing themselves to sit on the side with infinity which can ruin an entire person, rather than embracing the limited side which guarantees importance. If it's that meaningful, if it's that required, why even keep an option with it? To stay would be to disrespect the idea. If limitation is that meaningful, that important, that required, why keep an option without it? To stay would just be to disrespect the idea. The only thing they can do is thrust themselves back into a world where it's impossible to ever embrace stasis again. Even if it means that what they find waiting for them is the same crappy life they left. A parent who doesn't even care the slightest bit, and the inability to take in the cats they love, where they may not even remember everything they learned, and where almost certainly no one else will. A world where they'll be alone with these memories, uncomfortable in their isolation. But a world where they can have the most important thing as a guarantee, even if they might not know it when they get back. And when they come back, what they find waiting for them is the exact same mundane, awful daily life which drove them to stasis in the first place. Nagara works the days away under an abusive boss in order to afford a place without his neglectful parent, and Mizuho lives without the cats her grandmother loved, maybe the only thing she loved too. As time ticks on and no one else remembers, as they find themselves numbed by this dull and grey world with such little impact and importance, they begin to question their motivations and if the experience ever even happened to begin with. How could they learn all about what it means for something to be important, only to find a world where nothing is? A world where Nozomi, the one who taught them that, is dating Azakaze, the boy who learned the exact same lesson as them, and was in the exact same spot to join them in return, but chose to stay anyway, unable to face a lack of his special powers. This world, the one they've returned to, it just feels wrong. Nagara is a new person, grown and changed for the better, but he's stuck in a world that doesn't care about that, one which can never replicate those powerful experiences which made him so separated from the person who used to mean so much to him, and finding himself unable to make good on their promise to meet again. It's frustrating to watch him never do so, and it feels like an even greater disrespect to the moments that they shared. I mean, he should be walking over there and reminding her of exactly who that boy she's with is, as he thought when Azakaze insulted her in that world, whenever he thought to himself,
"This time I'll show you the light."
would it really be that wrong to reclaim the one thing he could from that world in this one, make himself and probably her a little bit happier too? Well, it probably would be. Nozomi was the one who showed him his wrongs and dug him out of his stasis. She became someone he was comfortable with, a new normal, and helped him understand how to not just fall into importance, but how to create it on his own, even in a world of pure stasis much more than this rainy and gray one. But more than anything, what she taught him was not to just accept a comfort all around him, but to embrace discomfort so that he could find the next thing and choose his own comfort, make it important. To respect everything she meant to him, all the ways he grew. That isn't to talk to her, but to leave her behind as the closed chapter of his life. She was right for that world, but maybe not for this one. She's just a comfort that meant so much, helped him, but he doesn't need anymore. A pain he has to hold on to and acknowledge to make him keep trying for something new. To not just replicate, but to explore and understand, to take the risks that one day find the next big thing not named Nozomi, just as those risks helped create Nozomi in the first place. The compass he once followed, her will, well, it now spins around aimlessly to offer no direction. And that's the point. Her will doesn't lead him anywhere anymore. He's aimless, entirely ready to choose what comes next on his own. To pick which direction to go and kill off a million other ones to make one great one. He walks away from Nozomi, likely to never speak to her again, with a smile. The best moments of his life so far are over. He just killed them. But because of that, he's exactly who he needs to be to find the next ones, the right ones for him, not for her will. There's something strange about this topic, though. By addressing life's best moments, we're talking about a very narrow slice, a few weeks each year maybe. If we take the American average of 2 weeks of vacation time, accounting for a bit of travel which are bad days and some good weekends which are good days, then that's basically our estimate, 2 weeks. Adding that up across a whole 60 years of adult life, that's 840 impactful days, compared to 21,060 regular ones. In this very rough estimate, about 4% of your life is made up of best days. The rest is that one stupid dish you hate because it can't go in the dishwasher, and the frustratingly poor planning of your city that leads 30-minute commutes to taking a whole hour and laying in bed on a Saturday morning until your head hurts, and then having a couple drinks in the evening to make it hurt once again. It's watching TV after spaghetti dinner courtesy of Ragu, and telling your friends all about what you watched the next day courtesy of Discord. Life is remarkably unremarkable. And so we should probably turn this around and seek to understand the ordinary, the 96% of our life instead. In many ways, that feels much more powerful, that large percentage, and, well, that's kind of the problem. These adventures and the drive for them become numbed against all these daily occurrences instead, 50 times pumping gas to get to work instead of just twice to get to vacation. This ratio places so much more effort and energy on the former, even as we value the latter so much more. This is the case for Kimuri in A Place Further Than the Universe, an average third-year student who sleeps in on the weekends and does little more than hang out with friends. Slipped comfortably into mundanity, she finds her old diary and sees the words, "Make the most of my youth," written years before, mocking the little remaining time she has left within it. Has she really forgotten to live life when she once set out so firmly to do so? It brings her to tears on the spot, and she resolves to change, setting a goal of simple adventure. She'll skip school, taking the train in the opposite direction instead, to the city, or to the beach, or to the mountains, to whatever waits at some random stop down the lines, driven by nothing but whimsy. She packs her bag in excitement, makes her excuses, gets to the station with all the will in the world, and then ends up at school anyway. After all, like she says, the train could crash, or maybe even a plane into it, or a meteor could strike it. There's so many things worrying away that chance. It's silly, and that's the point. Yes, so many great things are just one decision away. But that forgets a couple words. We should say, yes, so many great things might be just one decision away. And that doubt means it's always easier not to do than to do. Think about all the possibilities. Okay, it's unlikely that there's actually a disaster that stops all the trains and gets her stuck away from home, but maybe it's just a malfunction that happens at the time she's supposed to be heading home, so now she's late and can't explain why she can't get home immediately even though she should be right there, which means she gets found out and probably grounded, and so now from adventuring out, she's gonna have even less adventure in her life because she tried to find it. The second she hops on that train, she's into uncertainty. And even if we learned how important that is in Sonny Boy is theory. A Place Further Than the Universe is practice. Knowing how important it is doesn't mean it's not difficult. After all, uncertainty is every possibility. How do you even consider that? Meanwhile, daily life is pretty much complete certainty. There's maybe little variances, say dinner is eaten at 7:40 instead of 7:30, and maybe traffic caused those extra 10 minutes, but the school bell rings at the same time, and you know the dangerous crosswalks to be careful with, and there's very little consequence or risk to anything. You can go on autopilot, ease through the day, and be totally fine, even comfortable. So while it's just one point decision in theory, how many decisions will the choice to adventure spawn down the line? Daily life has the least to consider and a good baseline of them, so we stop thinking beyond. We settle for an average we know over a great that we don't. Kimuri recognizes this about her own life and says, "I've always hated that part of myself." She wants something new and exciting, but she doesn't have a nose me to take her away from a terrible life and into a different one. She just has her regular life in a regular town, no strong feelings enough to leave or to hate. That is, until she finds someone who does, the iron-willed Shirise who's dead set on making it to Antarctica. She has those strong feelings to leave because that place across the world is where her mother loved and died as one of the first civilian expeditions from Japan. Shirase wants to join the revival trip years later, working almost the entire time since to raise the funds needed, 1,000,000 yen in total. Seeing this pure determination, a massive boost to actually getting started on such a great adventure, Kimuri joins in, and with the help of 2 more, Hinata and Yuzuki, they manage to find an excuse onto the expedition, train in all the necessary skills, raise the right funds, and ensure their trip. Running down the city streets to not get caught sneaking into the expedition meeting before all that, Kimuri feels alive, like anything can happen. Which means before they've even set sail, her life is already changing. Where she once chickened out of skipping school, now she gets to do so with a free pass, instead spending the day navigating the wilderness and sleeping under the stars, an adventure of its own. The once average student now gets to speak in front of the whole class before she leaves, so that everyone knows she's doing something amazing, with skills that would seem almost nonsensical to everyone else, things they have never thought of. The person who is starting and will return from this journey is more diligent, resilient, and interesting than the one who never did. And that's what she actually hated. The real problem with 96% of life. As she admits to her longtime friend Megami, someone more serious and mature, and someone who has advice and direction for every moment of her life, what she hated most was their relationship. Kimuri hated being reliant on someone so much more confident and prepared, someone who could lead her into the best option time and time again. After all, Megami is the one who gets Kimuri excused from school the day she tried to adventure, and so Kimuri actually wasted her skill and efforts there in order to just bask in Megami's confidence more instead. It felt like she was using her, undeserving of what she saw as great direction. Failing her friend's efforts and never growing for the better, or even at all really, was she someone who deserved such a nice life of home-cooked meals and video games and karaoke? Did she ever find those things, or did they simply find her? What she realizes is that she doesn't want to go on an adventure to escape all of those things, but to be someone who can properly find and as such deserve them. Someone who can not just take, but who can make. Don't get me wrong on all this. Daily life can suck. Your situation might be terrible. It might be a bad career or neglectful family, and those are things that are awful and should be changed. And so the following idea only applies to something truly comfortable and safe. But the thing is, 96% of our life isn't some leech draining our energy, and that's why we fall into it. In the best case, it's something that we choose to give ourselves over to and make mundane exactly because it's so worthwhile. We see this when Kimuri and company begin their properly huge journey, and what they find is basically every single reason why travel can suck. They have a whole passport fiasco where they could miss the entire thing. The actual ship itself is a constant toil where they have to spend every free moment working out to stay ready for the terribly cold and unforgiving conditions, and yeah, they're learning skills, but when will they actually ever use them again? They certainly don't help them out as the boat rocks all the way to 60 degrees and paralyzes them with gut-wrenching seasickness for an entire night just to reach a place where you die without protective gear. They do find some amazing things along the way, the penguins and the whales, the stunning views, but the majority of this adventure is not amazement, it's struggle. The ratio is terrible, maybe even 24-1, just like daily life. Is this actually different, or does it just seem that way? Their stopover in Singapore serves as some enlightenment on this. To them, it is an absolutely amazing place. I mean, they are in a boat on a skyscraper, overlooking all of the places and things they have never seen before. And yet, when they see all this, what they speak to is how a place which is so foreign and amazing to them is only possible because it's so mundane to others. Most of those lights are just someone's home where they rest for the next day, a local restaurant where they eat at when they don't feel like cooking, and the headlights of their car riding to the job they hate at this very hotel where the girls are standing in whimsy. These people would be much more amazed to see their sleepy little Japanese town, the rolling hills with different trees and flowers, a pace of life probably so much slower where you can appreciate not a blazing fast whole city view, but just one landscape slowly passing by in the train window. This city is not full of amazing things, it is full of amazing things to them. And this is where the autopilot of daily life might be required. If their adventure requires others' work, then without the mundane, there is physically no excitement. Think about it, you can't go out to a bar if there's no bartender. Part of this daily life arrangement, and only part because it is often so unfair, is because of this. We're taking turns. Or we go on autopilot and build back up that desire for more, we make possible the best moments of someone else, changing sheets or stocking shelves or running assembly lines or whatever small part is needed to make greater things possible, to make air travel and all those things that allow adventure. And then whenever they're done, they go back to their production of ease, and we step up to utilize it in turn. This topic isn't just about one person, but about the whole ecosystem of people. Adventure isn't really about amazement then, it's just about perspective, being forced to see things in a different light than usual. And if that's the case, do they really need Antarctica to do so? After all, they could have gone camping or ran around the city at any point without it. The only difference was having a reason to do so, a cost to be afraid of losing, or a friend to avoid disappointing. But can't we just decide on some reason anyway? That's all they did after all. Nothing demanded that they go to Antarctica. They simply sunken cost fallacy themselves into a need to follow through with it. Maybe once we're aware of all this though, all it will take is to head out earlier than usual, watch the sunrise over those buildings you've never looked at before, to see them for the first time, even though you've seen them 1,000 times. Adventure could simply be exactly what Kimura wanted to do, just taking the train in a different direction. I mean, after all, say you took a map of your city, and you traced all the roads that you've actually traveled. How much of it would be unexplored? That's adventure waiting all around you. This is furthered even more by the greatest thing these girls find on their adventure, something they could have found anywhere in friendship. They didn't even know each other only a few months ago, but now they know some of each other's deepest secrets, the true selves the camera never picks up, or a past they'd like to forget, and accept each other for all of it. As they stare out at those amazing sights, what they feel and focus on is the warmth of the people right next to them. It's how they deal with the challenges and work together to get there in the first place, the understanding they develop in the moments of toil where that 96% is almost enjoyed through jokes and laughs. What they've created here isn't anything new or specific to Antarctica, it merely exaggerates the need for those things. It's just a situation which demanded the skills they always had to be used, a room where they were literally stuck in bed with each other sick, so it's gonna be easier if they're talking honestly, where they only eat what they can prepare, so they better be friendly enough to work together and efficiently. This is what adventure really is. It isn't finding new things, but it's forcing yourself into a situation to appreciate what was always there as if it's something new. It's removing the appearance of the usual comforts and taking them under a new look, tricking yourself into feeling like it's all brand new, making the things you could be doing every day feel almost like an act of survival. And that's the really odd thing about daily life. When it's truly safe and comfortable, it's composed of things that were so special you allowed them to become repetitive and feel unspecial. People you love so much that you can allow love to be expressed in sharing a bed and washing the dishes rather than your best or nicest outfit. Places which were once so new and unknown that you can now walk into without a care in the world. It's so comfortable that it removes the feeling which helped make it so in the first place. That 4% of life defeats and transforms itself into the other 96%. It's so obvious. If every moment was special, then what is a special moment? But less obviously, change those words around, shrink the scope. What's to say there isn't something special about what we see every day that's simply buried in so many things being special at once? If we stepped away from it, took a moment outside of that perspective, would it feel more amazing even though nothing about it changed? And that's where adventure really comes in. It's a tool that we have to choose when and where to use. This is something Kimura stresses during those worst moments of seasickness on the boat, as everyone else begins to believe that, well, they have to get through these terrible moments because there's no choice, and after all, you can't exactly hop off the boat. She rejects the idea, instead saying that there was always a choice, and that they chose to be here, chose to go on this adventure. Because this isn't school or work, something they're legally or socially obligated to do. This is adventure, a horrible thing they went out of their way and paid for to go on. They could have just sat at home and been comfortable, never taken on this cost, but they did. And since they did, it shouldn't be passive. They have to make something of it because it is a tool they're using to see those sights and appreciate them. And if they don't, what was it all for? They can't come to terms with it just by saying we have to. No, they did this. And that's why their journey can become so great, allowing them to make the most of what was always there because they have a stake in it. So if that can help them make the most of such a terrible situation, imagine what it could do in a much better one back home. After all, it even provides them with the necessary perspective to really decide on life back home instead of taking it passively. The views in Antarctica are probably unrivaled by almost anywhere else in the world, and we have been downplaying that a lot. This would be a truly special sight to behold that very few have. We can't forget that human spirit to go and see because it's afforded us so much. But that amazement is not just tempered by, but created by the costs, that such a sight can only be so amazing exactly because it's inhospitable to our species, forcing us to never be able to make it mundane. It requires a lot. But to walk out to the edge of town and watch the sunrise over the hills, well, that's pretty special too, and it requires a lot less. It's special, but it's also tamed, attainable to almost anyone at almost any time so long as they choose it. The perspective of giving up so much for a view is the important thing. To know how much it took, and then to appreciate how little it can take back home, and to understand that's exactly why we should call such a place home. Because it was once such a great spot that someone decided they would stay forever. We branch out in order to remember this, making the old feel new once again, appreciating the effortlessness. Plus, as Kimmery was worried about, it proves without a doubt that we're worthy of such great things too. If they can handle all that work and training in cold and make friends and all of that, then they can sure as hell make friends back home too. Of course she deserves a home-cooked meal after living somewhere that can freeze your cup of ramen up in the air. The perspective isn't just on your surroundings, it's on yourself. Placing you somewhere new to see what you're truly made of and how you fit into, or rather, how you help make the place you love back home. And that's why the story doesn't end in Antarctica, but back in the train station, the workplace, and the home. They all give a small speech about how special these things feel now. A home that's always had a smell to it, but which can only be smelled when you're not used to it, and how nice a smell it is. That's the end of it all. How do we know we love that smell unless we leave for a moment to check, to let our senses become unaccustomed to it? Adventure isn't an escape from daily life. It's just leaving it for a moment to check if it and if we are right, and then choosing it when we return so that we have to make the best of it. And on a similar note of discovery, this video was never to change your life. It was to come to terms with the one that already exists. 588 days. 1 year, 7 months, and 13 days. That so much time has passed between this writing and a night that I can never forget. It was the second day of my local anime convention, and with it I'd taken a leap out of my comfort zone and into something a lot bigger and a lot smaller at once. Back when 2019 ticked over into 2020, I'd been telling myself that I should host a panel, but, well, you know what happened next, so I never did. It stayed like that for 3 years until the start of our story in 2023, where I was approved to host 2. That was the bigger part. The smaller part was, well, my clothing. I was doing this all dressed as bunny girl Haruko, you know, from that one single scene in Fooly Cooly. I'd be speaking in front of more people than ever in my life in the least I'd ever worn to cover myself. I guess I can't throw stones at the idea of jumping into such a large adventure, given I'd lumped all my hopes of living life into such a small space myself. Engaging with my passions, expressing my identity, making new friends, being seen as smart and funny, it was trying to get everything I wanted at once. I guess it felt like I had to do it that way. I was working my 80-hour weeks then, so I was in a pretty weird place. I had no time in my life for love, no time to deal with the natural issues of another life, and that led me to make some mistakes I'll always regret. So many situations I'd wish I had the clarity to handle better, instead gaining an insight for the worst of my character. I was meeting strangers on Saturday nights to fill that void, but strangers is the key word. There were a lot of "we should do this again" texts, but a 0% rate on follow-through. There were nights where I would chat with friends during the week, but only after extra work and only if I wanted to sleep less and make the next day a little bit worse. I was having fun, but in such a prescripted way, not living life, but swallowing a dose here and there. A gram of Soma Fridays at 5 and another Saturday at 8. And this pattern time was flying by, made even more apparent by the rapidly approaching date of the con and all the work it required. It was here already? Put another way, I worked that many days away with nothing important happening? The encroaching time stressed its importance. This had to be the weekend of my life. It was a bit of an unacknowledged crisis which led me to take this step, and for a while it really did feel like a stretch. I did not have all the time I needed to prepare all of these panels and the costume and a lot going on at once, but I'm glad I followed through despite those doubts. I got to talk about cyberpunk anime in a full-on lecture hall, ranting about what it means to be human via psychopaths and ergo proxy, and I had a room full of some 50 people laughing at horrible face swaps, dumb screenshots, and the most absurd quotes. Looking out as each slide swapped to see the little whispers between a group of friends playing some small part in their memorable weekend, some small part in making that $100-some worthwhile, that was something to call the real point of it all. Their time and their energy being used in the act of living life out and about, I got to help facilitate that side of things for once, not someone alone in their room or in the background at work. Maybe I'm making this video in part to try and do so again. After all, if you live a little more because of my words, then, well, my words have lived a bit of life too. But the most notable part of this weekend was after my fun panel, when someone from the back of the crowd waited around to say that they went to subscribe to my channel, and it turns out they already were. That was only the 4th or 5th time that I'd been recognized, and so despite the assumption that I was somewhat forgotten about, it was still a great thing. We got to speak for a bit about, how kind of wild that is. There's thousands of people here, and 2 who've already formed some invisible bond, however loose, through words traveling across invisible waves called Wi-Fi and solid wired called the internet, now got to solidify that bond. Seeing as this was their first con, I was honored to be a part of making it something worthwhile. Waving goodbye after that, you know for sure that what you're doing is worthwhile. But work doesn't entail life. What I did was worthwhile, but what about my time elsewhere? That high of the invisible turned real is where the day petered out. What followed was a lot of standing around with some indecisive friends of a friend doing people watching, but that really just meant looking at your phone and refusing to make a decision on what we wanted to do. It was literal hours of just waiting and seeing what we'd like to do, only for it to then be too late to do anything at all because of how long the waiting took. 1 minute's walk away, there was a silly half-rave, what they call a dance party, quite possibly the best summary in that building of life being lived in some other world from reality, and we were just sitting in crowded silence. I wanted nothing more than to enter that world and shun the inaction, but I was complicit in the cowardice too. I didn't think I could really just go in there alone. Hell, I can count on one hand how many times I've danced in my life, so to do it there, alone, after such slowly boiling anger with no lead to follow, I would just be standing in the back awkwardly. I would hate knowing I failed more than wishing I had. So fed up with this longing boiling over, I left to go back to my car, undecided on if I'd head home, tail between legs, chug the flask of vodka waiting there and try to head back in, or do the chugging and still chicken out anyway, simply making the trip home illegal. I settled on the legal version of the second option, and after giving it some 15 minutes of despair to let it all settle in, staring into the dark car cabins parked ahead of me and imagining other, better lives inhabiting them, I decided to head back in. The walk from that lot to the convention center is quite a bright one, along the river's edge and just included within the chaos of downtown, and even more lively today with so many people who have been waiting for this day all year, excited by their chance to express love for this part of their life, and now adorned in the brightest, loudest costumes possible. Hell, even I was dressed that way. Hell, even I wanted to feel that way. But I felt alone on that walk. The colors went gray and the sounds were just a drone. Waiting for the light and crossing the street, automatic doors opened twice, up the escalator and around the bend, up one more, turn to face down the long hallway across the entire center, start walking straight with a left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. My footsteps died halfway through as I sat down on a bench, imagining the scene waiting inside and how little I was right for it. And I mean, not even just ill-prepared, but ill-fitting. Bright lights aren't meant to land on dead eyes, thumping music on blocked ears. It wasn't for me, no matter how many hopes and dreams I imagined into it. I should have just said hi to someone across those 2 days. People even walked around in costumes designed to get interaction. I mean, I literally did that myself in the past and met people from it, so why didn't I just do that again? This adventure was beyond me, so obviously. And my overreach had killed the will even for those simple hellos, so those real possibilities now felt just as impossible. Dulled to the joy around me, I turned back the other way because the escalator waited. I wondered what kind of spiteful, jaded person would be born at the bottom of it. Luckily, it never happened. In the greatest coincidence of my entire life, maybe, coming up that escalator as I turned the corner to go back down were the people I'd met after my panel. They were so clearly drunk that they were happy to see me, some stranger from a few hours before. And maybe that state was the same reason as me, hoping it would loosen them into life. They started to talk, and I started to respond about what I'd entirely forgotten, aside from how they were heading for the rave. And some small ounce of hope revived by their joy said I was too. Possibly it was the best lie I'd ever told, responding to the best coincidence I've ever experienced. As we walked and talked back down that hallway, the colors and sounds grew brighter and louder near those theater doors, winding through the partitions and across the threshold into everything I feared, into lights and balloons bouncing about, into sweat and screams all around, into the front of the crowd where we could hear the terrible remixes and see ill-fitting anime clips on screens flanking just such a stereotypical DJ. As the revolving patterns of lights damaged my eyes, Haruko would come up on the screens and I would yell inaudibly across the music, "Look, it's me!" To which they would nod politely, unable to hear pointless chatter drowned out by so much life. They started and I followed, dancing the goddamn Macarena for the first time ever because they didn't know how to dance either, so they just defaulted to that and I fumbled my way through copying them. I smiled and laughed, messing up those moves, hoping and flailing with friends forged in the necessity of a large crowd, four wheels combining into one to weather the storm. A storm that felt quite literal as we dipped in and out of circles, forming and unforming, lines traversing the entire room like a current of life. At one point, they broke out a stash of those silly bendable glow sticks and made me a necklace and some bracelets. We put them all together into huge circles and spun them on our wrists like children, waved them around in the air, handed them out to more people, and until writing this very sentence, I forgot that those very same ones that expressed everything about that night sit in a box under my bed. So I'm a liar. Across those 588 days, I have forgotten that one night. Little reminders of such a powerful experience sitting idle, slowly fading in brightness and from memory underneath packed lunches and traffic and favorite restaurants and Monday nights and all the mundanity. You can probably see where this is going. The music eventually stopped and the lights came on. They ushered everyone out, the people working there desperate to get home and sleep, and we all walked the opposite way. Left, right, the hallway down the escalator, around the bend and down another, like time was walking itself back, calling me back into the past I hated so much. I was desperate for it to stop so that I could continue, so this moment could be one much longer than just a couple hours, more than just a percent of a percent of a percent of a percent of my life. Maybe I could go to more cons, or maybe I could just find some raves in the city, but maybe I only had 16 hours of free time a week and knew that those were lies. This was the only chance. I couldn't just let it end. I finally stepped forward, broken out of that shell, and had the adventure I'd always wished, and this is all it would be? A couple hours of me? I asked if they wanted to get food, even though it was already 2 or 3 a.m., but they couldn't, and everywhere was closed anyway. We walked all the way to my car because maybe they didn't want it to end either, but after so much life at once, exhaustion sets in, and eventually it had to. I said goodbye and got into my car. A slamming door, a turning key, and it was all behind me. With no music, I drove home along the highway, windows down, the rushing night freezing my face. Maybe I could make that dwindling smile permanent with enough cold. But the repetitious routes of a city dulled the novelty of these moments, little reminders that almost all is the same, that every great experience ends on the same pathways as always. The smile was gone well before I was even home. It was over. Once again, one of the moments that felt worthwhile, that broke me out of zombie-like exhaustion and endless work, it was over. And now, god damn it, now I had to know. I had to do this all again, but while knowing all that I miss. How does one go back when they know? I was happier never knowing that potential, being an unproven and stupid sap who felt worthless enough to work it all away, not a braver soul who could actually go out and get it, because now I had a proof to disappoint with my inaction. Each day wasn't just a day now. In comparison, it felt like waste. All the color drained out again, and the world was totally gray. I would open that box and stare at those wristbands. It was probably 5 times a day, every few minutes, in absolute disbelief. If I couldn't hold them in my hands, with how dull life now felt compared to something so exciting, if I couldn't hold them in my hands, I wouldn't have believed that it had happened. And maybe it would have been easier if I couldn't. And I guess that's why, eventually, I just stopped looking. 562 days ago from writing this, I published a video called The Depths of Obsession. In it, I told a story about writing, where I almost tanked my entire career on this site chasing the explanation of a single feeling, a single night, and how to cope with it. About how I was watching the shows this topic covered on repeat at work, speaking bits of the script out in the car, writing it well past bedtime because it felt so close, and then finding it impossibly far away once more, only now on even less sleep than usual. I would keep my conversations to just a few words so that all of my processing was left to try and run the topic in my head once more. I was bitter, tired, and angry at my lack of understanding, only worsened by the loss of my lead on releasing videos. Anymore, and I'd slowly fall behind, passing the barrier of responsibility and into just focus on total obsession, falling down that slippery slope and losing that responsibility which kept me doing this for so long. The end of that Depths of Obsession video was me deleting some 80 pages of work I'd done on that former topic, which failed to even come close to satisfaction. A month of work down the drain, because if it wasn't, I would be. In this essay, 1 year, 6 months, and 17 days later, is me reviving all of that. This is the exact topic which almost spoiled my entire ability to write, now put before you as a total creation. And it's only possible because I stopped looking in that box, because the moment it is about has become so dull and so far behind me, experienced by a different, in many ways lesser person than the one speaking to you now. One who wasn't prepared to face what it really meant, who was missing parts from across all life to fill in the gaps. In those 562 days, I learned why I hate the idea of fate, how we can buy into paranoia, the necessity of violence, the ethics of judgment, the danger of dreams, the ways in which youth is never wasted, convenient truths and flooding faith, the fears of being genuine, of transformation, of the past, of AI, of change, the tragedy of time and place, the link between body and mind, the line between man and beast, suffering, loneliness, conviction, freedom, maturity, discomfort, doublethink, hopelessness, and that's not even all of it. The tragedy of all of this is that it was such an important night, one strong enough to make me rethink and almost lose everything I'd built that is now just one point among so much else. But life is complex. Tragedy and hope can occur at once. Because that's what such a night was meant to be, exactly so that all of that other stuff could become as well. It's what every day is meant to be. One day, one point, one video, and nothing more. Because, while that was undeniably one of the greatest nights of my life, it was also probably experienced by one of the worst people I'd ever been. Because everyone telling a story is controlling their own narrative. When I was sitting in that car imagining better lives in other cabins, I was also fighting with a, I guess, long-distance relationship over text. I'd sent a bunch of depressed, hopeless messages about the whole experience, about sitting around in my inaction and hating the life that I have, and then deleting them all a few minutes later and refusing to express how I was really feeling about the night. They saw them all disappear and wanted me to be open and actually say why. More, be open about what could still happen, and I was ready to just be closed off and find an excuse to recede back into my work even further, back into the very thing which gave us such little time together to begin with. It was a whole mess of what was really just one issue, probably much clearer to them than to me, and what they saw was me willing to just ignore it all away. In a way, to ignore them and everything important in my life. I think there were many times that they had unreasonable expectations and shifted goalposts, justifications designed for relationship advantage, but this one time was one where I'd taken their role of unrelenting depression from them, which usually frustrated me so much to deal with, and then made them deal with it instead. Not only was it a terrible moment of my character, but it was one I expressly should have known to avoid from having dealt with it so often. And I just didn't. I say all this to paint an accurate picture of the person this moment happened to. It was everything good you've seen in me across all of those videos, but also of this right here, this depression and obsession and willing frustration. And so, if I truly retained that moment forever, kept the conditions the same enough to be one with it, wouldn't I still be the same person who was almost inherently incapable of love? Wouldn't I have missed all the other moments and conditions and feelings which led me to make those other videos and actually break out of such a stupor? That moment happened to a much lesser person than this one, and if it truly persisted, I would just be finding myself perfect with deep flaws as my proof. And the way I became better was through a collection of those moments. A whole moment while we're living it, it's much too large to actually be understood. It's 17,000 visual and auditory inputs all happening at once, however many names and faces were present for it and everything they said and did, a location with its own temperature and feel and vibe, how hungry you were and what you ate last and how bad you needed to use the bathroom and why you didn't. It is literal existence itself because you are existing, and so every part of being a human is included in that moment as you are experiencing it. That's why I struggled so much with comprehending it in the immediate wake. It wasn't just the path I took and a few bits I could recall, just enough for you to take and fill in the gaps. It was every name and face and smell and sight and emotion and sensation all flooding at once. There was simply too much to collapse down, no way to package it into something comprehensive because it all felt so important. But then as time passed, so much of that started to fade. Smells, well, those are probably better off forgotten considering it was a sweaty ass room. Sights, I only have a brief recollection of shapes and forms with assumptive fill-ins, a general structure but no bright distractions. Sounds, I recall hardly anything of what was said or the songs, just that, well, things were said and heard. Even faces and names, those have all faded away. And I wonder if that's insulting, to hear so much about yourself and yet that I couldn't even reliably pick you out of a crowd. And last of all, the last things which have never truly faded, which may take the longest, are the feelings. The extreme of hope and despair in a single night. As formless shapes, they persist. And that's the point. Those things are the important parts, the core, the remaining pieces which are carried forward, which drove us forward and made us get into these moments in the first place that sum them all up. Everything else spawned and spawns from those. All of this recollection I've done, simply a feeling which is expanded back out. It stores those meanings of those moments, the most motivating and telling aspects, and then allows the rest, the pointless distraction which can simply be remade by imaginative human minds, to fall away into endless obscurity where it belongs. Everything I have said and learned here today is possible exactly because I was free to recreate the memory from what was the most important about it, rather than being caught up on pointless details. Everything I've learned across all that time in between that made me a better person and improved my skills here so much, it's all the same. I don't remember each day or every topic I've covered, but I remember a select few words and phrases, the deeper meaning recalled from vague shapes, with enough effort placed deep within my mind to be taken later as inherent knowledge. Each topic I write upon is sat on the corpses of the ones before it, restating some things but only to expand upon them now that I've collected the cores of other topics, other memories, which a newer, better person experienced with a newer, better mind formed of vague, shapeless, important moments. Yes, it feels almost shameful that we seem to remember so little of what we experience and learn. but everything which comes afterwards holds that within its conditions, and who we are is the summary of the most important parts. If you feel stupid after learning so much, it's only because you now take that knowledge as your default state. Every important moment, every bit of knowledge exists and then fades away into the obscurity of us to make a greater one possible. I am here understanding these moments exactly because they're gone. And what this created for me, my proof of it all, is a much different life than the one that person experiencing this moment led. I didn't really actively change anything about my mindset. I didn't go out and get a new job or move to a new city. I just kept existing, gathering more and more points. I got so many manic pixie nightmares and loves with no name that I eventually stopped feeling like I needed them all so much. Each one appeared for a moment and showed me something about this life that I've crafted, proving dissatisfactions that went on to become joys or simply reaffirming what already was, but all here and then gone, only a month, a week, a night, before condensing, collapsing, blurring into the same image and leaving only the most important parts about this life that had been crafted. A daily life that was developed and proven, rid of all the negative feelings that led to such a search in the first place because of all I'd learned. I think for the first time ever, it's life that I kind of enjoy. I still hate the work I do 3 days a week, but it's only 3 now exactly because I set about packaging, learning from, and then discarding these moments, growing to make better and better scripts you all now enjoy. I still work until 7:30 or 8 on those weeknights and get up at 6 the next morning, but when I finish, I get to set down my phone, get off my computer, and detach from the longing for a wider world and appreciate that everything it contains exists right in front of me, that I can find just as much beauty in the view outside of my window as going all the way across the country. That on every single Friday, right in this stupid little town where I exist, I get to go to the same spot by the same route at the same time and play nerdy card games with my friends, removing all the horrible doubt of different places and different times, and leaving only the thing that I love most with amazing people. And then on Sundays, it's the same thing, as I get to go see the man who helped me start along this path before one day much too soon, he's going to be dust. And then on almost every other night, with someone I love who's hearing these words right now, someone I love who is willing to listen to me wax poetic about someone else I only knew for one night, someone who's willing to put up with a 2-week obsessive, annoyingly pretentious workaholic writer, that with her, I get to cut up carrots and wash the dishes afterwards and endlessly quote "I think you should leave" and be overbearing about our adorable dog and take on all the stress of soon buying a home. And I wonder how she puts up with all of this. With someone who doesn't just think of things that make them cry, but then catalogs and obsesses over them, and then actually writes them down and speaks them while crying to thousands of people on the internet. And it makes me wonder how there's even a space so fantastic in this world for someone like me. And when I speak all this and say all this over an hour of words, what I know is that there is a space like that because we made it. Because we each carried forward the most important parts and then forgot the rest. And now what we live of consists only of those important parts, days of the most special things that can survive mundanity. That is what that had all been for, this whole journey, packaging these experiences, everything about it. It was not to come to terms with finding something outside of this life, but it was to understand how I'd made it into something, how we have made it into something we actually enjoy. And I want to thank you for all of that, because when I say we, it also includes you to some extent for helping me to get there. Because without you, none of this would have had a chance, would have had the motivation to keep going and make me this person that I think I can love with a life I think I can love. Your time is very valuable, and now more so than ever, in the longest video I've ever made, you spent it here with me. And that means a lot. It's always meant a lot. And so, all I can say is again, thank you for that.